led by the conservative Konrad Adenauer. The young Habermas's relation to Heidegger, which began with hopeful enthusiasm but soon turned to feelings of disappointment and betrayal, was symptomatic of his relation to the whole Adenauer regime. In his view, it represented a collective and calculated refusal to acknowledge and break with the past. In 1954, Habermas obtained a doctorate with a dissertation on the German idealist philosopher Friedrich Schelling. He then turned to the work of Herbert Marcuse and the early Karl Marx, and 2 years later became the first research assistant of the philosopher Theodor W. Adorno at the Institute for Social Research at Frankfurt. Habermas was moved by the experience of his teachers at Frankfurt, Adorno and Max Horkheimer, both of German Jewish origin, and both of whom had an understandably ambivalent sense of belonging to German tradition. For them, Habermas learned how to identify with his own German traditions from a critical distance, which enabled him, as he put it, to continue them in a self-critical spirit with the skepticism and the clear-sightedness of the man who has already once been fooled. In this period, Habermas's work became more radical and more sympathetic to Marx, too much so for the liking of Horkheimer, the Institute's director, who took exception to Habermas's openly Marxist views and engineered his departure from the Institute. In 1958, Habermas left Frankfurt for the University of Marburg, where in 1961 he received his habilitation. Thereafter, he became professor of philosophy at Heidelberg, and in 1964 returned to take up the post of professor of philosophy and sociology at the University of Frankfurt. During this time of political ferment, Habermas famously fell out with the student radicals, with whom he was broadly speaking sympathetic, when he provocatively termed their policy of out-and-out confrontation with all authority left fascism. From 1971 to 1983, he was the director of the Max Planck Institute in Starnberg. In 1983, Habermas returned to teach philosophy at the University of Frankfurt, where he established his reputation as a leading social theorist and as a respected voice of the democratic left in West Germany. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and in the aftermath, Habermas witnessed at first hand the unification of Germany. He was among those who were highly critical of the way the unification process was conducted. In the early 1990s, Habermas became increasingly interested in the work of the American political philosopher John Rawls, in his conception of liberalism, and in the tradition of American constitutional democracy. Habermas's critics on the left often paint a caricature of his career, according to which he began as a Marxist critic of capitalism and ended up as a defender of American liberal democracy. This caricature, though superficially plausible, is simplistic and based on an inability to grasp the complexity of his political and intellectual allegiances. Habermas was as much critic of Marxism as Marxist critic, and has always had grave misgivings about both capitalism and liberalism. Yet he counts West Germany's successful appropriation of the traditions of Western democracy as its greatest cultural achievement, even if he values these traditions more negatively as a way of breaking with the wrong continuities of his own political culture than positively. For just this reason, the German sociologist Ralph Dahrendorf went so far as to dub him, not without a certain irony, Adenauer's true grandson. In all this complexity, and in spite of the great changes in the intellectual and political climate of the last 50 years, there is an extraordinary continuity to Habermas's intellectual and political vision. I have sketched the psychological motivation and the biographical origins of Habermas's ambivalent relation to Germany and his enduring misgivings about nationalism. However, one should avoid the temptation to personalize these aspects of his work. It is easy to forget that the inherent complexities and tensions of recent German history and politics are alive and actual. This is made vivid to public visitors to the transparent dome of the Reichstag in Berlin, from where one can both look out toward the Brandenburg Gate and the new Holocaust Memorial, and also look right down into the parliamentary chamber below. No social and political theory captures these complexities and tensions as nicely and uses them to better advantage than Habermas's. They ground his cosmopolitanism, his support for the European Union, his distrust of nationalism and defense of constitutional patriotism.